everybody. My name is Greg Murray. I'm the Director of Life Planning at Vistamar School in El Segundo, California, and the Chair of the Data Trends and Analytics Committee. Welcome back to another episode of DTA Today. We're excited to discuss our newest topic, Platform Prowess, Unpacking the College Counseling Tech Terrain and Data Reliability. They will be exploring key features of platforms like Scoir, Alpha, College Kickstart, and focusing on the data reliability and usage, particularly in the context of scattergrams and reporting. Pleased to welcome Chris Rodriguez from the Lovett School, who is going to be our moderator for today's conversation, and he's going to introduce our panelists.
All right, thank you so much, Greg. I am Chris Rodriguez, and I currently serve as the Associate Director of College Counseling at the Lovett School in Atlanta. And just to call attention to the thing on my face here, I'm an MMA fighter. This is the result now. I had a dermatology appointment today, and so just wanted to make sure that was taken care of. But the genesis of today's session was kind of a series of discussions I was having with colleagues about how hard it is to find reliable information on comparing different college counseling CRMs. You kind of catch bits and pieces in conversation here and there, but I've never seen anything that kind of lays out everything at the same time next to each other. So for that reason, we thought it'd be interesting to kind of invite some panelists to speak about their experiences with software used in their offices, including all the pros and the cons and everything else they've experienced along the way. Our goal was to include kind of all the big ones, and I think we largely succeeded. My learning was the only one that proved a little bit too difficult to locate a representative for, and I'll just say that we didn't receive a great deal of help from them, and I'll leave it at that. But otherwise, we have panelists who can speak about Scoir, Alpha, College Kickstart, and even the wily veteran itself, Naviance. Some of our guests will be using, I guess they currently use multiple platforms simultaneously, but I'll let them cover kind of the nuances of that. So pleased to welcome our amazing panelists and share some information about them. So first up, we have Pam Ambler, who I've known for about 10 years in our capacity as Atlanta Mercerians all those years ago. Pam currently serves as the Associate Director of College Counseling at Pace Academy, also here in Atlanta, where she's worked for 6 years. Prior to her current role, Pam served as a college counselor at 2 other Atlanta area independent schools and also worked in the Office of Undergraduate Admission at Emory University. She has served as a member of SACAC's Board of Directors and is currently enjoying mentor-mentee partnerships as part of the SACAC Leads program. While she encourages students to make data-informed decisions, as a college counselor, Pam prides herself on teaching students that their voice and their wishes for their college experience are far more important than the rankings. So thank you, Pam. Next up, we have Iris Martinez. And Iris currently serves as the Director of College and Career Guidance at Christopher Columbus High School in Miami, Florida, where she helps students plan for and achieve their post-secondary education goals. Prior to her current role, Iris worked for 8 years as the Senior Assistant Director of Admission at the University of Miami, designing and executing initiatives that identified, recruited, and yielded students from historically underrepresented groups, including the U Dreamers program. Iris is an active member of the college admission field, serving as a member of SACAC's Board of Directors and presenting at regional and national conferences. These opportunities have allowed her to cultivate meaningful relationships with higher education professionals and build bridges in different areas. So we're very excited to have Iris with us today. And last up, we have Mark Rasic. Mark serves as the Director of College Counseling at Polytechnic School in Pasadena, California, where he has worked for 10 years. Prior to that, he worked at admissions at 3 institutions, including 7 years at the University of Southern California, his alma mater. While at USC, he oversaw recruitment strategy and supervised the admission team. Prior to that, he worked as a middle and high school English teacher in the Los Angeles area for 10 years. As a college counselor, he believes that students do best and learn most when given good support while empowered to succeed or otherwise be on their own terms. So far, this approach has worked very well. So welcome, Mark. And I guess as kind of a reminder to our audience today, the session is being recorded and will be made available on the Access member website following our presentation. We try to save a bit of time at the end of our sessions to address some of the questions from members. So just please make use of the Q&A feature as we go along, and we'll try to kind of collect those and assess where we are and maybe even get them addressed on the fly. But first, I guess let's turn to some of our prepared questions for the panel. So I guess just to start out with, I would love to know from each of you, just kind of maybe just kind of walk us through how you chose your current platform and talk a bit about how your usage of that system has kind of evolved during that time. And we'd also love to know just maybe how long you've worked with that particular company. So Pam, you wanna give us a start here?
Happy to. I would say that when I first joined PACE, we were a Naviance school, and Naviance was just becoming less and less responsive to just general maintenance questions and requests for just help desk things. And so our goal was to do anything but Naviance at that time. And we researched a couple of platforms. And I was actually looking back in my inbox. So we landed on Scoir. We joined in November of 2019. And we all know what happens next was 2020. And in March, everybody went home. Some things that went into our research, though, were really just the main thing that we needed to accomplish is submission of documents. And so that really drove our efforts to learn more and the kind of targeted questions that we had. We also joined at a time when Scoir was free. And so from a price point standpoint, it was really a no-brainer. Generally speaking, we're really, really happy users, but I think it's because we don't need our platform to do all of the things. We rely on a lot of one-on-one counseling and team-based counseling. And so we don't need the scattergrams to be perfect. We do need to be able to send documents without getting the little screen that slows down and and halts. So hopefully that gives a good overview of why we're happy users, and maybe a little later in the conversation, I might share some things that could be better. But for right now, I think that's a good intro.
Awesome. Iris, talk us through what you use and how you kind of got to that point.
So we currently use C Alpha. We are on year 4. And when I first started in this position, we're starting like our 4th cycle. When I started in this position back in 2021, they had just signed the contract and moved away from Naviance. Again, like Pam was mentioning, more so because of the response time from them, that it just got longer and longer. C Alpha is a company that is not based in the US. They are more so international. But I came in the conversation, I basically just inherited the platform. I've since learned everything about the platform and utilize it. We mainly utilize it for groups. One of the really good features is groups, and because of the number of counselors that we have and our caseload, which is pretty large, is roughly around 450 students per grade level. We want to make sure that our counselors are communicating with their students, as a whole. So we use a lot of their group features. Their broadcast features amazing because you have open rate, click-through rate, attachments and whatnot. So that communication, and I'm sure we're going to get into the whole scattergram conversation a little later, but as I've come to learn more of the platform, I've realized that there's different features that we utilize more than others. And it's more so the communication, but like Pam was also mentioning, our goal is to be able to manage our load of application management and the documents and sending those successfully. Common App one and done that you just send, and it goes through and you get receipts of that, as well as through Parchment. So that has definitely worked for us.
Excellent. Mark, want to take us home with what you use at Polytechnic?
Sure. So I guess my response is a two-part response. First, as our main platform, we still use Naviance. We use Naviance. When I came to Poly in 2014, when I took over as director, I learned that the IT department pays for Naviance, so I never see an invoice. And for what we do in Naviance, sending documents, running large-scale reports on admission results, and rep visits, it works perfectly fine for us. So I know Naviance is maybe as nearly as hated as the College Board, but I just don't feel that way. It's been fine. I think we're probably paying more than we need to because we don't use a lot of the functionality. And I guess it's busyness and laziness that prevents me from really looking to make a change to something more affordable. However, I think I was brought here primarily to talk about College Kickstart. And we started using College Kickstart in the midst of the pandemic. Prior to that, I had received many emails from George Fan asking me to sit for a sales pitch, giving me a sense of what College Kickstart does. And while it seemed interesting and I had heard good things about it, I was resistant because I felt as a college counselor, it was my job to determine if a list was a strong list and to determine if schools are reach targets and likelies. And then the pandemic happened and everything became ridiculously unpredictable. So I actually sat with George and I decided with my head of school that we would sign on to Kickstart, at least as a test. And we've been extremely happy with it. We obviously use it to help students build their lists. And when they introduced CK360, which is one of the add-ons you can have that has lots of interesting dynamic data reporting tools, we signed on to that and we've stuck with that since. And I've been extremely happy with that as well. So a little resistant until I didn't really have a choice. And since I signed on, I couldn't be happier with College Kickstart.
Yeah, wonderful. And something I didn't mention up top is that here at Lovett, we use both Scoir and College Kickstart. I've also used Naviance in the past, so that's kind of the context that I bring to this. So some of you touched on, you kind of anticipated my next question, which is maybe mentioning some of the things that you really like about this system. So talk a little bit about how it makes your lives easier, how it makes it easier for you to counsel students and families. Anyone want to kind of jump in on that one?
I guess I'll start on that. I'll talk about Kickstart. So I think what Kickstart provided that I didn't have in Naviance, and I really didn't have up to that point, because while I can run a spreadsheet and I can do the basics in Excel, I'm no whiz at any of that sort of stuff, is it provided some really great reports. So I think the most useful was the quintile report that really broke down by quintile how our students were applying, how they were performing as far as admission results, and where they were enrolling. And I used that the first time I had access to it. I used it, turned it into a bit of a graphic and used that in my board report. And I don't think I've ever had such a positive response to a single slide in my board reports, for them to see how the top of our class, and we don't rank, so they know that, but the top of our class by GPA, and probably most important, the 4th and 5th quintiles, how they were performing and how impressive those results really were. So overall, things look pretty good here at Poly. I think they look very good, but not all board members agree with that. But when you broke it down by quintile, I think it was hard to argue that things weren't going extremely well. And then when it comes to CK360, the scattergrams for the institutional profiles for each college, I think are far superior to anything I've ever seen in Naviance. They're very dynamic, very easy to manipulate as far as ED versus regular decision, different years, all sorts of stuff. And they just introduced a new part of CK360 that I've just started to take a look at, called decile analysis, which is like the quintile report in the report section, but it's much more graphic. I don't know how I'm going to use this with students and families, but I know that just for my own knowledge, what I'm seeing is very impressive to me. So I'm very pleased with all of the data functionality within College Kickstart.
And you're absolutely preaching to the choir on Kickstart. As someone who is on the data trends and analytics committee. I'm kind of a mark for data. So I think George Fan knew who his audience was when I was talking to him. But absolutely, the visualization of data within Kickstart, both for any kind of audience, whether it's the board, whether it's teachers, whether it's families, it's, I think, second to none.
Yeah. People lean in when you start showing them the scattergrams, or I just shown a few people the decile analysis, they just start leaning in and they're fascinated by it.
I'd love to jump in.
Yeah, Pam, go ahead.
I was going to jump in because we also
okay.
use Kickstart, and I wanted to sort of pair it with how the two systems don't talk, Kickstart and Scoir, but they can work nicely in tandem with one another. I love what Mark said earlier about your initial hesitation to sort of sit down with George was, well, that's my job to say if a school is, you know, an unlikely, a target, a reach, and things like that. And it has been such an amazing infusion of data into conversations at this exact time of year. So we're meeting with a student and their guardian right now. So we'll call them team meetings. And, you know, you'll have kids come in and they are squarely in the bottom 10% of the class. Even if we don't rank, we know where they are. And they're looking at schools that admit 6% or fewer. And it has been so powerful to take their list of schools that they're following in Scoir, put them into Kickstart, and then show them the grade, like an assigned letter grade that Kickstart will give to a student. And it helps them get a sense of, oh, wow, this is really unlikely that I'm going to have a great process, or I'm going to get off to a slow start, or wow, as I look at the notification dates on all of these schools, I won't likely have any good news until March. And something that we really, really aim for in the PACE community is having a school in your pocket that you're excited about before the winter holiday. And so it has been so great to run the tape by using the data from Kickstart, as opposed to sounding like I'm the counselor who doesn't believe in you, by inserting that realistic, you know, hey, have you heard how hard it is to get into University of Georgia these days? I don't have to say that in isolation. I can show that to a family, and they actually seem grateful for the information instead of resistant toward it. But I'll say for Scoir, things that I like about it, and we were kind of forced to adopt and adapt and like it very quickly because everybody was sent home. So you really had to kind of fall in love with this new platform, for better or worse. And so I would imagine I'm very guilty of not using all of its functionality, but as compared to Naviance, it sure is pretty. I think the functionality is intuitive, but there are more pictures associated with institutions. I think that helps students who are using it. Something else that drew me in was the inclusion of cost for parents on their side of the platform. They can cost compare different institutions. And I think in our community, oftentimes families don't necessarily pay attention to those realities as early as they could. But the Scoir platform kind of makes it so that it's right there in front of you, in case you might notice. From submitting documents, it's mostly faster and mostly reliable lots of the time, but there are instances where certain colleges are not really partners, or they're having trouble matching up documents. So you do have to pay attention sometimes as a Scoir user, but the scattergrams are there. There's a survey function, and then the reporting. I think the canned reports that Scoir offers are fine, but that's not really what we're going to use for a board report. Their customization of reports tool is fantastic. And so you just have to kind of work harder on the front end. I was talking with Jonathan about that before I sat down for this webinar. So there are instances where you do have to put in a little extra work on the front end, but then Scoir will work for you really, really well.
And Pam, something that you mentioned about Kickstart that kind of jogged something in my mind is that given the kind of hyper fixation on grades that a lot of our students and a lot of our families have, the fact that Kickstart grades a list, it kind of uses it against them in some way. It's like, okay, here's your grade. You know, you always want an A. Let's see if we can get this list to an A.
Yeah, how's that D- going for
Yeah,
you?
exactly. Iris, how about C Alpha? What do you like about it?
So I mentioned the broadcast feature. That's like literally my favorite feature because of communication and accountability and tracking. It's like, oh no, parents or students, I never received that email. It's like, I see that you opened it on this day at this time. I see it was clicked through. But another feature that I really do, that we started using actually last year was checklists. Yes, they have surveys. Yes, they have like different things, but the checklist, I could create a checklist to a specific group or a specific class, whether it's like complete your assessments. And then there's an automated email. Hey, this is due in a week, due in 3 days. This is past due. So as soon as the students log in, on their profile, they could see their checklist items, like complete your brag sheet. If you're applying to University of X, this is due. Register for a college rep visit. So the checklist allows us to customize and do the work that we do with the number of counselors and the caseload that we have. So We find that the checklist is something that it's very well accepted and received by both students and families. The families can see the checklist, but they can't complete the checklist items. And we could kind of move them, this is completed, this is done. And the student can do that as well, and we can just review. But the sending of the documents has been easy in terms of like you prepare the documents, the Common App School, all the Common App documents, and then you hit send. And if there is an error for whatever reason, for whichever, whether it's a parchment school or mail school or whatnot, if you hit send and something happens, it'll be read, and then it'll send you an email just in case you move to the next student and you didn't see it. So that's that notification. It's good, especially when we have the caseload that we have. It is the in comparison to Naviance, because I had seen Naviance before, the interface, it's relatively easy to navigate. So that's good with the recommenders, and seeing and picking recommendation letters to send to different schools. But one of the main features, aside from, sending documents, one of the main features that we use are the checklist and the broadcast feature, which is when we send messages to and communications to families, and text messages, which either text, you can send a text via the platform, or an email.
Excellent. So obviously, if you're going to have a pros list, you're going to have a cons list. And that was, I think, part of the conversation about the planning of this, is that there seems to be no perfect platform. There's no platform that does everything ideally and doesn't do anything wrong. And so for each of your platforms, what have you maybe found to be your least favorite part of it? What maybe makes your jobs harder as you're working with it? Does anyone have any place they want to start? Pam, you want to talk about one of yours maybe?
I can jump in, just kind of a small grievance. Scoir might be a little bit too easy for college reps to book visits because there's this function, and I like all this terminology, but as a counselor, for those of you who don't use Scoir, you can populate schools into a student's suggested column. And I like that because it's not saying I've hijacked your list and here's what you're going to do. It's, hey, I'm suggesting these, research these. But as soon as they move them from that suggested to that following, if a college rep books a visit, let's say it's in the fall, they get an email that lets the student know, like, hey, this rep's coming to your school. And then that rep might change their mind 6 times in less than an hour. And that same student gets all of these emails. And it's a quick way for a student to disengage. So that's something that I wish maybe just the reps understood that was happening in real time. But not the end of the world by any stretch, but it can color what we think of someone before they walk in the building, because it is, in a way, influencing a first impression in this world of hasty turnover. I would say something else that I almost wish weren't a feature because it's not as reliable. Fee waivers and ED agreements through Scoir don't seem to be as seamless as you might trust they should be. And so I tend to kind of kick it more to an old school approach, just to make sure that those really important documents are being received by a school. So I might go hunting for their preferred admission document received email address, just to make sure I'm pushing stuff through, because you can't have that stuff going missing. So those are a couple of things that you can submit a report for, but it is, or a help ticket for, but it is hard for them to please everyone, I suppose. And so, but generally we're happy.
I'll add that for me, it's more so not having a dashboard where I could see what student is missing. If a student added a school and they didn't notify us, how would we know to send a document? Right? So it puts a lot of onus on the counselor to continue those conversations, but given our caseload, it is a bit challenging when students are adding schools and we're not getting a notification, and we've already went through sending all the documents, especially if it's a parchment school. But the student, if it's a school in the Common App, like let's say, I'm gonna just throw one in there that's on the Common App, but have their own institutional. Florida State, they're on the Common App, but they also have their institutional. So if the student adds it to their CALFO list, it'll automatically populate under Common App, but it'll give you the option to move to parchment, but only if I know that the student added it and the student told me that they applied via the institutional app. Because again, the caseload prohibits me from like literally checking every single one every single day. So having a dashboard would be ideal of what documents need to be submitted, how many ED agreements have not been yet signed, or how many fee waivers have not yet been signed would be ideal in terms of managing that application document season of sending documents. That to me would be probably the biggest pain point.
So when it comes to Naviance, I just wish Naviance was smaller. I wish I could find a system that does basically three things: enter lists, request letters of recommendation, and send all documents, and rep visits. That's all I really need, because Kickstart does everything else for me. And I wish Kickstart would do those things, but I worry that it might mess it up. So maybe not. But the thing about Kickstart that there's a couple things that I really don't like about Kickstart. The first is that Kickstart basically takes GPA and test score and gives them equal weight when determining if a school is a reach, a target, or an unlikely a reach, a target, or a likely for a student. And that doesn't seem right to me. I know that GPA is much more important. You can also add, if you're a school that only does unweighted GPAs, you can also add a rigor ranking into that. So that will add to it as well. And I've asked Kickstart several times if there's a way that they can basically include a switch where I can turn that switch on and set a GPA under which a student, basically if a student has a GPA under that, it will always be an unlikely for that student. Because if a student has a low GPA and a high test score, it might not make that an unlikely for that student, which to me is not good at all. I have to explain that. Somebody included a comment or a question in the Q&A asking about basically that the US system is much more nuanced. There's lots of things that go into it besides those data points, and that's true. I always tell the students, Kickstart is a robot. It uses 2 or 3 data points to give you an answer, and that is not a perfect answer always. It's pretty spot on, but there is nuance to that, and that's where I work with Kickstart. So my job remains important. Kickstart can't replace me, which is a good thing. And I can then explain to a student why I agree with Kickstart or why I disagree. Perhaps this isn't a reach. Perhaps it's an unlikely for you or a target for you. And you can, in fact, as the counselor, go in and make adjustments, move a school from reach to target, and cite a reason for that adjustment. Maybe it's because it's a student athlete or the family has a very clear and strong relationship with that institution, or whatever other reason you might want to indicate. So you can always adjust those things as well. But Kickstart is not perfect, and it does not replace the counselor. That conversation after the Kickstart list is run is crucial for the student to understand what's happening.
Absolutely. Pam, something that you mentioned actually kind of aligned with one of the questions that came up in the chat, which was talking about Scoir document sending, which I have found definitely to be one of the downsides. It seems like it's actually degrading over time in terms of its ability to send documents reliably. And recently at Lovett, a couple of weeks ago, we had our annual admissions summit. We had, I think, 6 or 7 different deans and directors from different colleges come, and it's kind of a reverse fly-in where they meet with different constituencies at our school, and we specifically ask them questions about Scoir, because our only viewpoint on something like Scoir is what we can see and what we're doing, what buttons we're pressing. We don't know what happens on the other side, and so we talked to them like, how easy have you found Scoir to use when it comes to documents? And a lot of them said like it's kind of a nightmare in terms of how it appears in Slate or how it appears in other systems when documents come through. It's a lot of stuff that has to be done manually when documents come through, and that's why I think you're starting to see a lot of colleges. A lot of students are telling us, this is showing up as not having been received, even though we know we've sent it 2 or 3 times, where it actually creates more work for us because we have to go maybe through our Slate account, or we have to email it, or we have to mail it. in order just to ensure that something does get there, especially if it is, something super important like a fee waiver, an ED document where you really need those to be in place. So just want to make sure I was answering that. And I'm sure that has been the case at other schools, because that's something that we're hearing from colleges. So I think one of you mentioned, some of the customer service reliability that you've experienced. And so when something has gone wrong with your system, or when you've come across maybe a feature that might be ideal to add, how accessible or communicative have you found the customer service team to be? I remember with Naviance, they would be kind of like adding features randomly in October, just out of the blue, just because they thought that'd be a perfect time to do it. And I think Scoir started to do that same thing. And so I'm curious about the systems you work with. What has your customer service experience been like, positive, negative?
I'll start. I'll say that with Cialfo, that's one of their pluses. It's their being accessible despite them being a company that's abroad and there's the time difference and whatnot. They are pretty accessible. As soon as I have an issue with X, Y, or Z, or I see something it's like wonky, they will respond. And the good thing, and something that have found that has worked for me and our school, is building that relationship with that kind of client manager, because they'll kind of expedite if the people on the back end on the chat may take a little long, a few more minutes than usual, but having that relationship is key. I know that at least for Cialfo, I'm part of their kind of like counselor advisory board. They have like another system online, like a page, it's not like a Facebook, but it's like a page where we provide updates. Other counselors talk about some other pain points, some other things that have worked. So it's like it's a nice community, and they are very responsive in that sense. Now, because my school is very different, every school is different, the way they function and they use the platform. Sometimes if you request a change or a feature or whatnot, it may take a little while, simply because that's not something that they could do for one school unless they do it for all the schools. So obviously they have to kind of like do their research there and whatnot. But give you a brief example. They're always doing changing the platform and adding new things. I had noticed that they had put one of the words when a student is accepted, denied and whatnot. One of the words was spelled differently, and it's usually how you spell it abroad. And it caused confusion with me and my students and families. So I remember I went on the chat and I said, hey, look, I think this is misspelled. And they realized that they're also in the Americas. So they went ahead and they made that change right away. So they are responsive. And again, but the key is to be close and have that relationship with your client manager.
I think with my approach to customer service with Naviance has been, I don't really have much expectation around that. If something goes wrong with Naviance, I usually just wait a day or two and it tends to fix itself. If it doesn't, I find a workaround. But I don't think I've ever tried to get on the phone with Naviance because it just didn't seem like a good use of my time. Nothing's ever gone horribly wrong. So I will say that I haven't really had any significant problems in that sense. When it comes to Kickstart, I couldn't be more happy. I feel like I'm like being paid by Kickstart. I promise you I'm not. But Victoria is our rep, and I will say her by name because she is responsive. I don't think there's anything I've sent her that she hasn't responded within a few hours, and definitely within a day. And if they forgot to turn something on that I expected to be on, she's very apologetic. I never mean it that way, but it's turned on immediately. If something's not working correctly, it is fixed immediately, and she lets me know she's on it, even if she doesn't have the fix right away. And then as far as kind of working things in, like I mentioned, the minimum GPA setting, I've told them this several times, and they are thinking about it. Now, that might be one thing. For some reason, they can't put in very easily, or maybe they don't want to. I don't know. But they've definitely assured me that they're considering it. I can tell that they've heard me, and we'll see if anything happens with it. But if you want good customer service, Kickstart is the way to go. And I've been worried that as they get bigger and bigger, more people sign on, it's going to diminish. And so far, I've seen no such effect whatsoever.
I'll chime in. I'll first kind of touch on the Super Bowl and Usher. These are my confessions that I have for the day. I've been doing this a lot this week, but I'm one of those people that has to be trained. And so, for example, when we bought our first house, within the first week, we were doing laundry and a pipe had a hole in it and it was explosive and very messy. And I did the best thing possible I could think of at the time. And I called my real estate agent and she's like, yeah, no, I sold you the house, but I'm not here to fix your pipe. And so students do that to us, right? They get to know us through the relationship and then they want us to solve their housing woes. So I would say that both of these systems, both for us would be Scoir and Kickstart, have done a nice job of handing us off to the correct person to solve challenges for you. And I would say just one kind of bit of constructive criticism about Kickstart is I feel that they are very much kind of West Coast, then go east. So I feel a little bit like some schools in the Southeast are going to have less recognition in Kickstart and perhaps not pop up as an addition. We've had a couple of challenges with HBCUs, for example, and I know that they were going to work on it, and I'll be circling back in about a week or two to see kind of if that has improved. But generally speaking, the customer service approach to Naviance that you mentioned, Mark, is exactly right. Like, just wait, and it might get better and it might not. But with Scoir and Kickstart, there is actually a quick responsiveness and a desire to make their clients happier. So it's been a nice change.
And it's something I think that is each of you is mentioned in a kind of small way that I would recommend as people are maybe assessing potential systems is asking if there are any staff members at those companies that have worked on the high school side in a school counseling or college counseling position, because I think so much I remember from Naviance and so much of Scoir now seems to be not designed in a logical way, where if you're familiar with our needs and kind of the beats of our day, this is not how we would have put things together. It's more put things together from an IT perspective or from some other perspective. And so I think just something interesting to collect if you're trying to do a comparison. One of the questions that has come up in our Q&A that I just wanted to make sure I threw out there before it got lost is, I think we had a couple questions about the Common App and documents, and for Scoir, for any of these systems, if you have found any kind of unreliability, has there been any consideration to start using the Common App to submit documents as kind of a fail-safe reaction?
Chris, I'm not sure. Maybe I should know the answer to this, but if you use Common App, can I then track, like, if things have been downloaded, if they've been received, the way I can do that in Naviance with each student's file and looking at a list for every school they've applied to? If I do that through Common App, is that equally possible? Does anyone know that?
We're getting a yes from the chat. It's not something I've ever done, and that's my experience was with Naviance and Scoir. And I know Naviance, that is one of the reliable pieces of it, but I think there have been a couple of people, maybe that is the reason why that question came about, is because you can make that, you can track this.
That's a very good question and something I should explore.
Yeah, no, I believe you can, and it'll say like download it, and it'll tell you if I remember correctly, it'll tell you the date too of when it was downloaded.
Thanks for the tip. I'll look into that.
Yeah, we have another comment saying that for Kickstart, and actually this is an interesting thing, because one of the things we have not mentioned with Kickstart is that you cannot submit documents through it. So you do need something to pair with it, whether it is Scoir or Naviance, CAlpha, something else. So one solution to that would be if you were to say, we want to take our budget and spend it on Kickstart because we really like the data underpinning it, or we like, the scattergrams or whatever, but we don't have money to, to Scoir or something else. Common App's free. So if you want to have the document submission be through Common App, that is one potential solution to that. So thank you for the suggestion that's out there on that. Wanted to ask a little bit about reporting, because I think for many counselors, especially directors, reporting is kind of the secret weapon of CRMs, which makes its flexibility pretty critical. So how much control do you have over the information that you include in reports? Is there something that you wish you had the ability to include that you don't currently have?
I will chime
Yeah.
in on this. This
Yeah.
is a pro that I found with Cialfo in terms of being able to customize our board report. So now I put in all the work at the very beginning of the year, like 2 years, 3 years ago, and of what my, the leadership was looking for. And I've been able to tweak it as years go by, like adding a little bit more information, college fair info, college fair visit info, etc. But they've been able to customize the report for me. So it's like a special tab that it's not necessarily available to other schools, because you could get the usual board report and it has just basic info. But I have like a hidden tab at least on my end, that is, it'll say my school's name, and then I could get that data the way I want it. I wish it had graphs. It doesn't have graphs, but it'll have the charts and the actual raw data, so you could actually go even further and do some pivot tables, etc. But it'll have everything for you, top schools, top averages, matriculations, applications, and then because we have different groups within each grade level, those who are scholars, honors, and just like the explorers, I'm able to kind of customize that data by those groups, and then overall the class of 23, the class of 24. So I worked hand in hand with the engineer to meet the needs of our school and what reporting I had. So now you could go back to 2021, starting in class of 2022. Every year the report looks the same, like the same page will have the same information, so it's easy to compare. And then obviously there's a few add-ons that we've had that's towards the end. But that I can't go, that has been amazing, being able to customize those reports to meet our needs.
Scoir does it well. You can customize it. That's better than the canned reporting, but I just can feel the goosebumps coming from Mark, because Kickstart 360 makes it look pretty.
And it's not just 360, just the normal reports that you get if you don't add 360. Gives you all sorts of useful data as far as comparing how your students did compared to national admit rates, and not just overall, but by different groupings, Ivy plus, levels of selectivity. I don't love Kickstart's breakdown on the level of selectivity, but I also don't hate them. I think that because they call most selective 25% and below, which I do philosophically agree with, but I would say that people in my community think most selective is under 10%. So it would be nice if they included that as well. But I can do that, not easily enough, but I've done that in the past before I had Kickstart. So that breakdown is very useful when board members especially have questions. Well, how did we perform with this group of schools? And we all know what group of schools those are. And you can have a really quick, easy answer there. And then as far as 360, the quintile, the decile reports, those aren't ones they're necessarily asking, but those are the ones where I think we really show how well our students are doing out there nationally, even when it seems like results aren't as strong as they might have been in the past. Still, relative to how things could go, things are going quite well. So Kickstart's reporting is exceptional for sure. So yes, the goosebumps are real. Yeah.
So this question is specifically for Pam and Mark. For just Pam, sorry. We have a question in the Q&A about if you could just pick one, Scoir or Kickstart, which one would you go with?
So for document submission, you've got to pick something. So maybe you could put your money towards Kickstart and then lean into Common App for submitting documents. But between Scoir and Kickstart, you can't actually choose unless you add something else for submission. But yeah, we just adopted Kickstart. We were in the room with Chris when Katrina pitched, and it has been really, really amazing to allow Kickstart to, in several instances, be the bad guy of the data, so that we can be the champion of strategy and list balancing around timing of notification. Like, these are concepts that are really hard for families, but because Kickstart makes it kind of compact and visual. It really is, it's changing the way our families receive hard news. So definitely look at Kickstart.
And just to, sorry, I know you didn't ask this question, but just to give one more reason behind Kickstart, something that I didn't really quite understand, but in my bio, I mentioned how I really like this process to empower students, and Kickstart empowers students to build their list. Sure, they have to put the schools into Kickstart and run it, but it gives them the freedom to learn the realities of their process without me present. And so they don't have to worry that they're going to name a school and I'm going to say reach, name a school, I'm going to say reach, because that can be really hard on students. We all know that. They can sit by themselves, sometimes with their parents, and have the time and the space to get their head around the realities of where they are in this competitive process. So that when they come to me, sometimes they're in a bit of a tough mental space, quite honestly. I ask them, how do you like Kickstart? That's my question always. And usually they don't like Kickstart. They think it's mean. That's when I remind them it's a robot. So it's not mean or nice. It's just a robot. And then we talk about how we're going to use the tool in order to find that balance and find good fit schools. So it really puts the onus and gives the empowerment to the students to lead this process in ways that they couldn't do before we went with Kickstart. So that's been very valuable. Awesome.
There was one question in the Q&A about if you're using Kickstart and you're trying to kind of migrate data over from Naviance or Scoir or CAlpha, does it feel like double the work? And I can just speak for our office's experience. It's very easy to batch upload data. It's usually just a CSV file where, as long as you have the data aligned in the right columns, you just hit boom, upload, it all goes in there. The one thing you need to make sure you're doing is, after every semester, if your GPAs are changing, make sure that those are changing. You need to make sure that you're on top of test score changes. If you have new ACT or SATs coming in, making sure that those are kind of updated for students. But that process, at least in our experience, has been very easy. I don't know for Pam or Mark if you have found any kind of downsides of Kickstart in that respect. Okay.
I would say just not a downside, but one other thing to be aware of for folks who are just now becoming curious about Kickstart. Mark is talking about student-powered mode, and at PACE, we've been a little bit hesitant to move toward that full empowerment of our students. And so we still have it kind of in administrative role mode. And so it's interesting that you can kind of phase in and put your big toe in the water, but not give students full control until you yourself know how it works. And you have more kind of experience just navigating these real conversations around data. So we're walking towards Mark's mode of student-powered mode, where they can really
Pam. Just do it. Don't be
do
scared.
it. Come on.
Just do it.
And I think the other thing to know for if you're wanting to buy a product, you want to be able to utilize it, right? And if it's expensive, you want to use it in a big way. Something else to know about Kickstart is you cannot run Kickstart unless the student has 6 schools in there, or at least that's how it's set up for us. And so it sort of necessitates that students begin to participate when you're really inviting them to participate, right? You can't just hover around with just your 3 schools if you want to be able to see kind of this data run. And I think that is an invitation to just kind of expand and what might you not know about other colleges, and let me help you, or use the search features and the filters to help yourself. But that's a good aspect to be aware of.
So I want to reach into our grab bag of potential other questions that we were going to get to if we have time, and unfortunately we do. And one of the questions I was thinking about was to kind of talk a little bit about the ability for students to research schools within the software. I will say for Scoir, that is one of the better features, where both for students and for counselors to be able to find out on the school's profile, all kinds of information about admission stats, yes, but even to the extent to be able to look at like a Google map and you'll see like it's, 7 miles to the nearest airport, or here's the nearest train station or bus station. Like there's some really cool features in there. There's some virtual tours in there. So for the systems that you use, what are the available resources for students or families to do research on any of those individual schools? Iris, do you have anything for CAlpha that they're able to use?
Yeah, so they could do research. They could do by, kind of categorize admission requirements, add the filters, right? Like the regions, the areas of study, majors. And once they click on that particular institution, they have access to like a little map of where they're located, a link to that particular school, its admissions website. It'll take them immediately to, it'll have videos and then like a campus tour, and then it's categorized by student life, student data, and it'll give them kind of like the accreditation, their contact info, how do you apply, and then towards the very end is how have our students particularly fared in their admission process. So like they'll be able to see kind of like the scattergram. Regardless of having this feature, I'm always, because again, there's always like, okay, when was the last time it was updated? Like, so I'm always very curious about that data. So I tell the students the best way to do your go to the institution's website. It's live. They could update it at any given point in time. But this provides a start for them. So we definitely take that.
For Naviance, I know there's some tools in Naviance where students can do research. We just have students do so little in Naviance at this point, because I really don't want them to have to navigate two systems that we haven't been using that at all. When it comes to Kickstart, they centralize a lot of really useful information in terms of admit rates and interview policies, with a link to the page on interview policies in terms of visits, and a link to the page for the school on where they can find out about the different visits and book a visit. I think the column that's most useful for me is the demonstrated interest column, because I have a very difficult time teaching students to take demonstrated interest seriously, which leads to some tough decisions in the spring sometimes. And so when I can show them, here is where it is, you don't have to go to each website and look up what their demonstrated interest policy is. It's all right here. Who do you need to prioritize right now in your junior year as far as doing a virtual visit or visiting over spring break or in the fall when the reps visit? Which school do you really need to prioritize? That really puts the onus on the student. It's all right here for you to know. It's your decision whether you're going to do this or not. And I think we've had fewer mistakes in terms of demonstrated interest, fewer students who haven't done a visit or gone to the rep visit, because they do understand, not all, but more, that that's an important part of the process for some schools.
Okay, and then I think we have about 6 minutes left. We have one question that was asked a little while ago in the Q&A that I think I understand what's being asked. Panelists may understand it too. So does anyone use a system that allows them to share data with other schools for more analysis? Naviance used to have a system to share unidentifiable data for scattergrams with a mapping for different grades. Does anyone recognize that feature? Yeah, it was not something that kind of was something that that I remember from Naviance, but I think that question was just curious about that possibility. There's a question about Kickstart in particular. We've noticed that our students' lists are getting longer and longer and reachier. Have you found that Kickstart has made lists a more reasonable length?
No, I haven't.
Pam,
It
have
does
you used
seem to
it
be
long enough
helping.
to?
It does seem to be helping a bit at pace. Maybe we had more help that we needed to cover. I do feel like students are motivated by seeing that tough grade. Our biggest high flyers are going to have a D- almost right out of the gate every time because of selectivity, and Mark referenced this earlier, but if a school's admitting 25% or less, it's going to automatically be a reach. But it really is training our kids that they've got to find somewhere that they like that's going to have an EA program that does notify, hopefully before winter break, that is a little bit more certain. And that part has helped infinitely. So perhaps not less reachy, But on the flip side, a little bit more of a foundation is actually being established without us having to beg and then them just adding a school to add it, but they're never gonna, consider it. So that part has definitely eased up in the past calendar year, and I'm really grateful.
Yeah, I agree with that part for sure. It's definitely helped the target and likely categories quite a bit, especially for early.
And that's been our experience at Lovett also with Kickstart is I always approach that conversation, with the comfort part of your list to say, if you want to, you can think about this as the worst case scenario. Like if you only get into one school or two schools, are you going to be okay with that? And let's get to a point, no matter what those schools are, where you feel like, okay, this may not be my first choice, but I have learned enough about the school to know that it could be a good fit for me as long as I kind of have the right attitude about it. So we are just about, I think we have 4 minutes left. We have answered all of our questions. I guess just as a kind of last final question for all of our panelists, any kind of parting wisdom that you have about the systems that you work with, anything that maybe we have not touched on that you would want people to know about CAlpha, Scoir, Kickstart, Naviance?
This might be silly, but something that feels really good to me about Scoir this time of year with regard to my seniors is you can run a roster and you can run it based on counselor assignments. I'm only going to see my kids. And as soon as that roster pulls up, for anyone who has already decided where they're enrolling, it has the icon of that school right next to their name. And it is so rewarding to scroll through those, let's say 30 seniors that I'm focusing in on and just look for the gaps to see like who needs my attention. I don't know, it when you have these like infinitely long to-do lists, it makes me feel motivated to capture those kids who need my attention quickly. And I just feel more productive because the visual is there. So I thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I'll say that there's really no perfect platform, right? But I believe, Pam mentioned this at the very, very beginning when she was talking about what her school was looking for. And it's think about what are those top 3, 4 things that you want the platform to do and just focus on those, right? Like what's the main goal of the platform? Ideally, like Mark had said, do the 3 things: request letters, send documents, and just let the kids add the list. Like it's okay to have those, I don't want to say little goals or tiny goals, but just top 3, top 4, and really work with the platform, whichever platform it is, to make it work. Because at the end of the day, you really can't do them all. Because each of these platforms are very, very comprehensive and they could do many, many things. So it's like, what are the top 3 that you want to focus on?
And I would say when it comes to Kickstart, I kind of jokingly told Pam, just do it, give the students the power. And I understand why you wouldn't want to do that immediately. You want to make sure you understand what it's going to be giving to the students before you allow it to do that. But as soon as possible, give the students the power, because when you switch from counselor controlled to student controlled, the student truly has it. I cannot add or remove schools on a student's list. I cannot change their test scores. I think I can change their GPA. I could still batch upload if I wanted to, but the student owns that account. And I say that to students as often as possible. This is your list. This is your account. It's your responsibility to make sure that you're finding the balance, that you're eventually, I tell them right now, I don't care about the size of your list. So if your grade is low because of size, don't worry about that. It will matter down the line. But it's your responsibility to get this to a place where it achieves balance, most of all, and for you to know why you're applying to each of the schools in the reach, target, and likely column. And giving them that, I think, sends a very strong message to them that I am not here to do this for you. I'm not going to tell you where you're applying. I'm not going to tell you how to apply. I'm going to support. I'm going to tell you when you're making a mistake, and I'm going to encourage you not to make that mistake. But you are the person who's in charge of this process. And to me, that's a very powerful message to send them with the main tool that we're giving them to manage the process. So I would say, Pam, as soon as you're ready, and maybe a little before that, give them control. It's very valuable.
Thanks for the vote of
Control
confidence.
that can be our parting message for today. So 3 o'clock, we hit it perfectly, 3 o'clock Eastern time, 12 o'clock Pacific. So thank you so much to our amazing panelists for carving some time out of their day, sharing their expertise. Thank you so much to all of you who participated, who asked questions, who were just with us in spirit. And thank you to those of you who are watching this later.